Right, so this is a 6-month update on my kind of solar house setup and kind of giving my thoughts and answering that question that kind of few people still ask. Does solar make sense here in the gloomy UK? So it's actually been just over 6 months now, so it's actually kind of 7 months and a little bit, but now's as good a time as any to kind of talk about how the solar system has been working, and I think now is just kind of we're hitting into the start of the really good bit. So to summarize, for those of you that hadn't been following along from the videos on the channel previously, on the 24th of August 2018, my solar installation was completed. So I have a 9 kilowatt solar array, can't get my words out properly, and that's 30 Payback panels, and each of those panels has a solar edge optimizer. If you're not familiar with the optimizers, basically it's a small inverter that goes on the back of each of the solar panels, and it kind of does a couple of things. It's really most ideal if you have a shaded area of your solar, so perhaps if there's a tree or something that affects it, and what the inverter helps to do is it maintains the performance of the whole string, so it doesn't impact multiple panels on the string if you just have shading on one of those panels. I actually realized in the winter that I do have a very small amount of shading in the winter months. When the sun is low and it hits my neighbour's garage, it does block off about 2-ish panels. So I'm actually even more happy that the inverters are there doing that. And it basically helps to maximise the performance of the panels, so you're getting the best performance out of the panels that you can. So 9 kilowatts of solar panels, and then that is limited by a 6 kilowatt solar edge HD wave inverter. And obviously you might be thinking, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why have you got 9 kilowatts and only a 6 kilowatt inverter? And there's a few reasons for that. First of all, on single phase, which is most common here in the UK in a residential home, at the time of doing this video and at the time of having it installed, 6 kilowatt inverter single phase is the largest inverter that Solar Edge do. So obviously I had the option of having a 6 kilowatt inverter and then a separate 3 kilowatt inverter, but decided not to go with that for a couple of reasons. One is there's obviously additional cost in buying the inverter. Inverter is really kind of a consumable item, so it doesn't last forever, so it's another thing to have to maintain and think about. And based on the estimates in terms of how the solar will perform throughout the year, having that additional cost would probably only give me about a 2% increase. So I'm still interested to work out after a year how those numbers really work and look and how the system is performing. But at the time of having the quotes and the installs, that's why I decided to go for a single inverter. And the other good thing about that kind of matchup is it works really well. So you can overpower the optimizer by, I think it's 150%, whatever it is, and the 9 kilowatts basically works fine on a 6 kilowatt inverter. And it also means that I'm able to get much better performance during the winter months and when there's lots of clouds, which is quite common in the UK. So having that larger array with the smaller inverter actually works really well. It helps the system perform a bit better. So I'm doing this video now, and it's what's the date today? 6th of April, something like that. 5th of April 2019. And so at the time of doing this video, so in between the 24th of August 2018 and now, the system has generated a total of 3.44 megawatt hours. So that's really impressive, considering really the 6 to 7 months that I've had the system is in that worst performing 6 to 7 months of the year. So it's really now, as we kind of went in towards the end of March, April, May, June, July, August, September, it's kind of where the good peak is. So I'm really excited to see what happens over the next 6 months in terms of performance. And obviously most people want to know about the cost. So as I mentioned in previous videos, not going to go into specifics on how much each thing cost me, because that's up to you to negotiate with your supplier. And prices of panels and inverters and batteries and all this sort of stuff is changing all the time. But if you want to know, my system costs around £17,000, and that is with obviously the panels, the optimizers, the inverter, along with a Tesla Powerwall 2, which was installed a bit later, which we'll talk about in a moment, as well as a My Energy Harvey and a My Energy Eddy, again, which we'll talk about those in a moment. So that's kind of the rough cost looking at the end of 2018. And obviously I benefit because my system was installed before the end of March 2019. I do get some FIT payments which will hopefully rise with inflation, which is guaranteed for the next 20 years. So that gives me a small amount of monies for the total amount I generate, and then 50% of my generation as an export tariff. So that's what helps me with the payback. So in terms of payback, so my current estimate is that in the 7 months that I've had the system, so obviously not including April, because I don't know what's going to be like at the end, but the saving of electricity is generated that I haven't had to buy from the grid, along with the feed-in tariff, that saving in terms of what is helping with the payback of that around £17,000 is so far £589.70. So that's actually kind of good, and it's on schedule. Obviously what that means for me is that the total payback for my solar install should be somewhere between 11 to 12 and a half years. That's including with the battery. If I didn't have a battery, it would be about just under 8 years to pay back based on the current estimates, the FIT payments, my usage, and no change in the cost of electricity, which we know is unlikely. So a couple of things have changed, which will have an impact for me, and hopefully will end up decreasing the amount of time for payback. So first of all, my electricity usage has increased because I'm doing a couple of things now. Now I have this My Energy Eddy. This is something that diverts surplus solar into heating my hot water tank via immersion heater, which I would previously be using gas for. So obviously over the winter months, so 4 months ish, I am still using gas whilst the central heating's on, but the rest of the time I'm heating that from electricity as opposed to gas. So my gas consumption goes down, and obviously electricity costs me nothing because it's generated from the solar. So I don't really know what that means right now. I need to have a whole kind of year to try and guesstimate what that means in terms of gas cost saving. I also had the Tesla Powerwall 2 installed. That was installed on the 1st of October just because of the delays from Tesla in getting that, so it wasn't available on the 24th of August. So since the 1st of October, I've also been minimising the amount of electricity that I put back into the grid, because the majority of that now goes into a Powerwall that I can consume when the sun goes down. So that's again enables me to use more electricity of what I've generated, as opposed to kind of giving it back and having to buy it back at a higher rate. And the other advantage of that over the winter months is that I've moved to the Octopus Go tariff, where the even electricity is around 5 pence per kilowatt. So I fill the battery up at 5 pence a kilowatt in the winter when there's not much sun, and I can use that during the day. So in general, lots of these activities as a result of the solar and as a result of the battery is, even though looks like my electricity usage has increased, which it has, it's at a much lower rate from the grid, or it's free from the generation. So we do find that kind of we use a washing machine more, you can use a tumble dryer and stuff in the winter, because we're not worried so much about the cost, because we are using it either on cheap electricity from the grid or from the solar surplus. So that's kind of how all these things are working. I'm pretty confident that over the next kind of 10 years, electricity prices are going to continue to increase. That obviously means that the system performs even better and provides even more savings over the electricity that we're using, that we obviously not having to buy from the grid because we can generate it ourselves. So my current feeling is kind of worst case, the system with the battery will have paid itself back after about 11 years, I think, worst case, which might sound like a long time, but then the other thing to think about is this system, let's say it is 11 years, there's still going to be a further 9 years so the system's paid back a further 9 years where I'm still getting these feed-in tariff payments, and also my panels and the inverter and everything. The panels are warranted for up to 80% performance over 30 years, and the inverter is warranted for 25 years. So I kind of got trouble-free, hopefully, electricity generation for 25 years. So that's a lot of time after these 11 years that the system will be performing and giving me, by then, literally free stuff. So I know we call it kind of free generation, not because we're kidding ourselves, it's how we talk about it, right? We know that we've had to pay this upfront cost to get the stuff, but after those 11 years, it'll be good. Like I said, it would have been 7 years if we didn't have the battery, but I still think a battery makes a lot of sense, unless you're at home all the day and you have a smaller system when you're consuming all that energy. Whereas even me, I'm at home all the time because I work from home. By that 6 kilowatts inverter, I was putting so much back into the grid until I got the Powerwall, and I can just use all that surplus electricity in the evening, as well as powering all my stuff during the day and not having to touch the grid. And actually on that, so obviously we're in the first week of April right now. We had some bad weather yesterday, but up until I think it was yesterday, I hadn't touched the grid for nearly 2 weeks, and this is not even in the good weather. So I did have to plug in. I didn't have to plug in. I decided to charge my car because I only had 102 miles of range due to some family things. Right now, I like to feel more comfortable that I've got larger range. So obviously I can charge at a public charger and not touch the grid, but makes no sense. So I just charged up at 5 pence a kilowatt off the economy 4 tariff. So that's kind of where we are with that. And then, as I just hinted to, if you watch the channel, you'll know I had already a Renault Zappi. I have been charging that up off the solar as well. Just plugged it in with a 3-pin plug, and when the solar's generating and charging that up. But I also recently purchased a Tesla Model S, and on the 11th of March, which is obviously quite recent, I got my Energy Zappi installed. So again, I can either schedule that to charge the car during the economy 4 tariff, only 5 pence a kilowatt, or I can schedule that, or I can configure that, I should say, to utilize surplus energy from the solar to put into the car to get me, essentially free motoring. So that's how the system's kind of set up right now. I can't give you really statistics on how much energy has gone into the water and the car for a couple of reasons. I'm really generally happy with the My Energy Eddy and Zappi products. They have had some issues, and there's been situations where I've had to completely reset those systems back to factory settings, which means I've lost all of the historical data. So the data I do have in there right now, I don't really think there's any point in sharing what that's been like over the last 6-7 months, because it isn't the last 6-7 months. It's like, well, the Zappi is like less than a month, and the Eddy, I think I had to wipe that in like November time. So again, wasn't really helpful. So that's kind of where we are with the system. I'm really happy with how it's performing. I think if I had the money sooner, I should have got solar and batteries earlier, but with all these things, it's about what you can afford at the time, and these costs of solar and batteries are changing all the time. Battery capacity is increasing, solar efficiency is getting better. So this kind of system probably would have cost more money, say 5 years ago, even if it was available. And obviously then the feed-in tariffs were higher. So I think there's no necessarily right or wrong time to do it. It's, when you have the money and you think it's going to be worthwhile, definitely consider doing this. I wouldn't necessarily think about doing it if you're not planning to stay in your house for the longer period, because you want to get that payback over time. And I also don't think it makes sense to buy a battery and just use it to use economy electricity, because I think the payback then is a very long time. So again, depending on what your kind of focus is, that's my thoughts. But I definitely think, to conclude this video, solar in the UK makes sense. I'm really happy with how everything is performing. I've got pretty much everything set up how I want it to be configured now. So the current way that I'm running is solar generation obviously powers the house. Any surplus that isn't powering the house right now goes into the Tesla Powerwall 2. This can charge and discharge at 5 kilowatts. So in general, my house uses around 500 watts when I'm at home and all the computers are on everything. So it's quite energy efficient, really, I think. So at peak at 6 kilowatts, that means there's 5.5 kilowatts of surplus available. So that goes into the battery, leaving around 500 watts, which will dribble back to the grid a little bit, but I tend to have the washing machine on, or a dishwasher or something when that's happening. So basically the Powerwall doesn't charge up as quick. Once the Powerwall has finished charging, I've now changed it so that the car will start getting electricity first. The reason for this is the EV charging protocol requires a minimum amount of 1.4 kilowatts. And so whereas previously I had it so that the hot water would heat up first, sorry about the battery run out. So I think I was just finishing off by saying about how I have the system set up. So right now the solar panels obviously provide power to the house, which tends to be around 500 to 600 watts during the day whilst my computer and everything are on. Obviously any surplus of that goes to the Tesla Powerwall 2. This can charge and discharge at a maximum of 5 kilowatt hours. That's the kind of size of the inverter it has. So typically that means that there's enough surplus if the system is at full pelt, generating that 6 kilowatt, which tends to be most of the time when the weather's fairly decent. And so that's charging. I tend to also have perhaps the dishwasher or the washing machine on at that time as well. So not the full 5 kilowatts can go in there, but it just avoids any additional surplus going back to the grid. And then the last few days I have changed the rest of the setup. So once the Powerwall 2 is full up, any surplus solar will now go to the car. The reason for this is that an EV requires a minimum of 1.4 kilowatt hours for charging to happen. And so whereas I had the system previously set up to go to the eddy to heat the hot water, and then once the hot water was fully heated, it would then charge the car. But obviously what happens is by the time the water had finished heating, it was getting towards the kind of the downwards spiral of the solar generation, which meant that there's typically about 2.3 kilowatt hours of surplus energy. So the car would start to charge, obviously then it would get below 1.4, and then I would just be kind of pushing 1.3 out to the grid for many hours. So the way I have things set up now is solar to house, then to Powerwall, then to car, then to eddy. But what actually really happens is there will be obviously a little bit of surplus when the Powerwall is kind of finishing charging. So that's maybe about 500 watts. That can automatically go to the eddy. That 500 watts will start to heat the water up a little bit. Obviously then, as the Powerwall finishes and the surplus is above 1.4, that will then stop heating the water in the eddy and will start to charge the car. The polling happens kind of every 30 seconds, so it should balance itself out. The car will start to charge there. If at any point during the day the solar surplus dips below 1.4, the car will stop charging, and then that, say 1.3 kilowatts for example, will then go back to continue to heat the water. And obviously then as the surplus goes above 1.4 again, it will switch back to the car and keep doing that until the car has reached its charge point, which I set to 80%. Then any surplus then will go back to heating the water. The reason I have it kind of set up this way is I think that's the best way of minimizing giving anything back to the grid. And obviously, because I can heat the water or charge the car from electricity, if I want to, I can either do that on the economy tariff, or if I decide to, I can utilize the energy that has been stored in the Powerwall to heat the water or charge the car. So I think this makes most sense. I'm going to continue on that for the next month or so and see how things are working. But I'm really happy with how everything's going. And I think after I have a full year's worth of solar generation, I can then try and estimate even how much money I've saved on gas, because I have a year-to-year gas usage comparison. So I can basically take the lesser amount as being the annual saving on gas and apply that also into the calculation for Payback. And then obviously once I understand how much electricity I'm using and then not buying of petrol, having an only electric car, I'll be able to kind of get the petrol saving cost that will go into that equation as well in terms of Payback. So that gas and petrol kind of calculation will factor into hopefully increasing the amount of time that the system gets paid back. So that's it. Any questions about the solar? There's various videos on the channel. So there's a playlist for the solar stuff, so My Solar House. But feel free to ask questions and leave comments in here, or ask me on the Spectrum Geeks channel on Twitter, and happy to give you my experience and feedback. The only things that are coming and hopefully be able to test in the future. So Solar Edge, people that make the inverter, are bringing out hopefully this year some 3-pin plug adapters, well 3-pin here in the UK, that you can then plug in your devices like washing machines, or basically anything that's got a 3-pin plug on it, and then you'll be able to utilize those also to power from a surplus perspective. So I'm interested to try those out as well, because currently I'm using some smart plugs that I can kind of turn on or turn off, or use a timer to help like charge the Twizy and things. So it'd be great to just charge the Twizy from just surplus automatically. And the thing my house doesn't have is I can never go fully off-grid for two reasons. Even though when I talk about being off-grid for nearly 2 weeks, you're never fully off-grid, because the grid always does some balancing. It plays an important kind of part in this. So just to give you an example, what that means is a system is generating 6 kilowatts, and let's say, I know this isn't really possible because my house will be using something, but if the whole 6 kilowatts is going in to charge the car, if then a cloud comes over for like 2 seconds, obviously that 6 kilowatts will drop down to say 2 kilowatts. And so what will happen is it will quickly pull the 4 kilowatts from the grid to maintain the car charging whilst it balances itself out, and then we'll readjust down to 2 kilowatts if that maintains for like 30 seconds. Obviously if the cloud then goes back and the sun comes out, so the 6 kilowatts generating the solar again, it will kind of rebalance, push a little bit back into the grid, and then kind of become even again. So in general usage of that balancing, you will see that you import, my system tends to import up to about 1 kilowatts per day in terms of that balancing, because of cloud cover and all that sort of thing, but you tend to push back around 700 watts to a kilowatt, so it all kind of balances out. That's why I still call it off-grid. And then so the other point about that is, even though I have a battery, if there is a power cut, my house will stop working. So the reason for that is to provide safety to the electrical grid. So when people are working, trying to fix the substation or the cabling, whatever the issue is, we can't have the system providing electricity back down the power lines when there's an issue. So to overcome that, you have to do something which is called islanding, where your house is islanded or disconnected from the grid, so your power is self-contained. So when poor John is working in the street, he doesn't get electrocuted because you're pumping 6 kilowatts of surplus back into the grid. The Tesla gateway, which is kind of the brain that kind of sits in between the grid and the solar and the power, and manages all that. Now, as of 2019, there is a backup gateway that's available in the UK. It's been available in the States for a little while, and that does allow your house to be islanded. The original estimate was that'd be about £500, so it was something I was considering, not because you get many power cuts, more as I'd be interested in it and trying it out and talking about it to you guys. But now it's available. They're saying it's like £1,500, and I don't have £1,500 to spend on something just for shits and giggles. So unless something changes, I will continue to, when we have a power cut, just use my UPS batteries as opposed to the big Tesla battery. And then I guess the only thing I didn't mention about the system is in terms of monitoring. So I know various people have said they like the graphs in the monthly updates I do. So those graphs all come from the Solar Edge monitoring system. So I've done a video about that already, so please check that out on the channel. And I also use the Tesla app it's just for me an easier way to look at real-time generation than looking at the Solar Edge app. And hopefully in the future I'll be getting the My Energy Hub, and there's going to be an app available to that, so I'll also have some graphical interface that looks at the eddy and the zappy in more real time, and give me the ability to kind of control that all from an app as well, and I can start sharing that with you in the monthly updates that we do. So I still think that solar makes sense in the UK. Obviously if you can afford it, I wouldn't necessarily advise people to get into debt or anything about it, but that's up to you to decide in terms of the payback, and if you think the investment is better than doing something else with. But for me, it's quite a high electricity user. I'm really happy with my solar system, and even though the weather is generally pretty crap in the UK, it still works really well, and it's giving me the results I want. And as I kind of mentioned in the monthly videos, the generation is typically almost spot on with the prediction, so that's why I'm still confident that the payback will happen no later than those worst case estimates, and if anything, I think it's going to be sooner. So good stuff. Thanks for watching this video. A thumbs up would be really appreciated. If you're interested in other geek type videos, please consider subscribing to Spectrum Geeks. Why not also follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And before you leave, why don't you check out one of these other videos that may be of interest. Thanks again for watching.